right, so we're diving deep today into the world of startups. Specifically, we're taking a look at this essay, Startup Growth.
Written by Paul Graham.
Yeah, Paul Graham, back in 2012.
But, it's still so relevant today.
Oh, absolutely,
And
especially if you're, thinking about starting something yourself.
especially then.
Yeah. So he starts off, and it's kind of interesting. He says right away, not every new company is a startup.
Right.
And at first you think, well, duh. But then when you think about it, you realize people use the words interchangeably all the time.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
He uses this great analogy, Barbie shop versus a search engine.
Oh, that's a good one.
Both businesses, both serving a market. But a barber shop, it can only grow so much.
Yeah. I mean, the best barber in the world, they can only cut so much hair in a day.
Yeah.
They're limited. Space,
Yeah.
number of clients, just physically.
Exactly. Now compare that to Google, search engine,
Huge.
billions of potential customers. That's scale. That's true startup territory.
So it's not just about being new. It's not just about being tech.
No.
It's that potential
Yeah.
for massive growth
Yeah.
baked in from the beginning.
Uh-huh.
That's the defining characteristic.
Yeah, it's not just a goal. It's the DNA of the startup.
Okay, so how do you get that growth? He says there's two main things.
Okay, first, got to solve a real problem.
Okay.
A problem a lot of people have.
Makes sense. You'd be surprised how many startups I think miss that first step.
Ah, tons. They love their idea, but is it solving a problem people actually have?
Right. And then second.
How to reach all those people.
So this is where we're getting to the scalability.
Scalability, exactly.
It can't be limited by location or, how many people you can hire.
Like the barber,
Yeah.
limited by the number of chairs in his shop.
Exactly. Versus Google serving billions of users with their search engine.
Right. And then this is where it gets really interesting, this concept of the idea blind spot.
Okay, tell me about this.
So sometimes people feel like they're just not, in the know enough to come up with a brilliant startup idea.
Right.
But Graham says, actually, startups often succeed because the founders see problems that other people just don't.
Because of their own experiences.
Yeah. It's their unique perspective.
So it's not that they're geniuses.
Yeah.
They've just encountered a problem.
Right.
Maybe struggled with it.
Right. And they're there's got to be a better way.
Uh-huh. So they're scratching their own itch, but it turns out a lot of other people have that same itch.
That's it. Steve Wozniak building his own computer.
Mid-70s.
Not a common problem back then, but his solution.
Led to Apple. Millions of people using personal computers.
Exactly. Or Larry Page and Sergey Brin. Google.
Frustrated with existing search engines.
They built a better one.
And it was a problem millions of other people had too.
And the rest is history, as they say. And what's cool, this idea blind spot, it's often unconscious. In the beginning, at least. They're not setting out to change the world just to solve this annoying problem.
But it's not enough to just have the idea. You got to execute.
Oh, yeah. And that's where the obsession with growth rate comes in.
All right, so tell me about that. What does he say about that?
Okay, Graham is very clear. Your success is measured by your week-over-week growth rate, not just absolute numbers.
And he gives some benchmarks, right?
Yeah, 5% to 7% weekly growth, good. 10%, that's exceptional. Below 1%, uh-oh, red flag.
Yeah, and these numbers, it's not just made up. They reflect the exponential growth that's so key for successful startups.
Right, power of compounding.
So imagine two companies, both making, say, $1,000 a month in revenue. Okay,
Mhm.
Company A, they're growing at 1% a week. Not bad, right? After 4 years, they're making a little over $7,000 a month.
Okay.
Now, Company B, 5% growth per week.
Yeah.
Same 4 years. Over $25 million a month.
Wow.
That's the power of that exponential
That's
growth.
huge.
Small difference in growth rate, massive difference in outcomes.
Exactly. And this obsession with growth, it's not just about vanity metrics.
It's a guide for every decision you make.
It's a compass. You're constantly tweaking, optimizing, all to hit that growth target.
So you're not just following a plan, you're being agile, adaptable, focused on that upward trajectory. Think about it for yourself, like your own projects.
Yeah. Are you measuring the right things? Are you focused on what truly matters?
That's the question. For any entrepreneur, for any innovator, really for anyone.
It's easy to get distracted by the wrong metrics.
Yeah,
But for startups that focus on growth, that's the difference between surviving and thriving.
absolutely.
And it's so interesting. This focus on growth,
Yeah.
it often leads startups down these unexpected paths.
Oh, really?
Almost
Like they change, they pivot.
it is like a form of evolutionary pressure,
That's interesting.
pushing them to adapt,
Okay, I like that analogy.
to evolve.
So what you're saying is a startup might end up looking totally different than what they started with,
Oh, yeah.
but that's not a bad thing.
No, not at all.
Okay.
In fact, Graham says that evolution is often a sign of a healthy startup. He compares it to a scientist following the truth.
I like that. Wherever it leads,
Yeah.
even if it means, ditching their original hypothesis.
So it's about being open to new possibilities,
Yeah.
pivoting when you need to, trusting that the pursuit of growth will get you to the right place.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And remember, this process, it's not always like smooth sailing.
Sure.
There'll be setbacks,
Of course.
dead ends,
Right.
moments of doubt.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But the startups that adapt the fastest,
Okay.
the ones that can learn from their mistakes and iterate quickly, those are the ones that really make it.
It reminds me of that Jeff Bezos quote.
Oh,
He
yeah.
said, what we need to do is always lean into the future. When the world changes around you and when it changes against you, what used to be a tailwind is now a headwind. You have to lean into that and figure out what to do because complaining isn't a strategy.
Perfect example. And that brings us to another point Graham makes. He compares starting a startup to being a research scientist.
I like that.
You're tackling these really hard problems.
Right. With, uncertain outcomes.
So just like a scientist might spend years working on a cure,
Exactly.
and it might not even work out.
Yeah, it might not work out, but the potential for that big breakthrough, that's what makes it exciting.
Right. The impact it could have on the world.
It's about having that vision, that belief in your idea.
The grit to keep going when things get tough.
Embracing uncertainty, being okay with failure.
Because you're really pushing the boundaries.
You're experimenting.
Trying to do something new.
Failure is just part of the process.
So Graham's saying the most successful startups are the ones who are willing to pivot, to adapt, maybe even abandon their original idea if something better comes along. It's that, what do they say? Fail fast, learn fast mentality.
That's it.
Always experimenting,
Yeah.
iterating.
Adjusting based on what you learn.
And sometimes those experiments, they lead to these unexpected breakthroughs, right?
It's like a scientist stumbling on a new discovery while they're working on something else completely
It's that serendipity,
open to.
recognizing the opportunity when it pops up.
Having the flexibility to jump on it.
So it's about following that trail,
Yeah.
even if it leads you somewhere totally different.
Exactly.
Okay, now I'm curious about the investors.
Yeah.
Why are they so eager to put money into these risky ventures?
Because of the potential VCs, they're betting on those few startups that hit it big,
Right.
that generate those crazy returns.
The ones that make up for all the ones that didn't work out.
It's like that power law distribution we talked about earlier.
Right.
A few huge successes can make all the difference.
So they're not looking for just a decent return.
No, they're swinging for the fences.
They want the next Google.
The next Amazon.
And the structure of the investment is important too, right?
VCs, they usually take equity in the company
So they share in the growth,
and the potential exit
whether it's an IPO
or an acquisition.
Now, this is different from traditional investments,
Right.
where you might get dividends based on the profits.
Exactly.
Can you explain a little more about why VCs prefer equity?
Sure, it comes down to incentives and alignment.
Okay.
When a VC takes equity,
Yeah.
their interests are lined up with the founders
So they both want the company to grow,
as fast as possible.
to get to that successful exit.
That's where the real payoff is.
Shared risk, shared reward.
And from the VC's perspective, equity is just easier to monitor than dividends.
Okay.
Prevents founders from, taking profits without the investors benefiting.
It's more transparent.
Makes sense, right?
So why would founders want to take VC money in the first place?
It all comes back to growth.
Okay.
Taking on investment allows them to, really accelerate their growth.
Even if they could get by on their own revenue.
It's about outpacing the competition.
Okay.
Seizing market share,
I see.
building that moat around their business,
It's like borrowing from your future success.
betting that the capital will help you reach your goals faster.
And ultimately make a bigger pie for everyone.
Exactly. But it's not always an easy decision.
Right.
Founders have to weigh the benefits of that fast growth against, giving up some of their ownership.
A piece of the pie in exchange for a potentially much bigger pie later on.
That's the trade-off.
But, as Graham points out, the most successful startups, they often get offered deals that they just can't refuse.
Yeah. The VCs need them more than they need the VCs.
So a profitable startup, they could choose to grow more slowly,
Organically.
but that can be risky, especially in tech, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Things move so fast.
Competitors are always out there
So it's that balance.
between control and opportunity.
Now, what about acquisitions? Why are big companies so eager to buy these startups, often for huge amounts of money?
It's not just about the technology or the product.
What else is it?
It's often about neutralizing a threat.
They're buying their competition before it gets too big.
That's a big part of it.
Wow.
A fast-growing startup can really disrupt an industry.
And the established players will pay a lot to avoid being left behind.
They see the writing on the wall
So it's like a preemptive strike.
to maintain their dominance.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think about Facebook buying Instagram.
Yeah,
Some people thought they way overpaid,
I remember that.
but for Facebook, it was strategic,
To eliminate a rival.
especially one that was popular with younger users.
Yeah, Instagram was exploding.
It shows how a company's value isn't just about its current revenue
It's their potential,
or growth trajectory.
a threat they pose.
Exactly. And this brings us to one of the most misunderstood parts of the startup world.
Okay, what's that?
The whole idea of acquisitions.
Okay.
Why they happen.
I think people see these big acquisitions and they think, oh, they just built a simple app and got rich.
Yeah, they think it's a rigged game.
Right.
But as Graham explains, there's no, secret group controlling everything.
Yeah, it's just the market working, right?
Supply and demand.
Risk and reward.
It's all connected.
So let's recap for our listener. Yeah, good idea.
Why are investors so into startups, even though they know most of them will fail?
Because the potential returns from the few that succeed are massive.
They're betting on the outliers.
The ones that change everything.
And the way they invest, taking equity, that aligns their interests with the founders.
Everyone wants to see that big exit.
Which brings us to the acquirers.
Those big companies with deep pockets.
Willing to spend billions.
And remember, it's not always just about the technology.
Right. It's often about eliminating a competitor.
That's right.
Before they become too powerful.
It's a defensive move.
So it all feeds back into itself.
The potential for big exits.
Fuels investor interest.
Which leads to rapid growth.
Which makes those startups even more attractive.
It's a cycle.
A high-stakes game.
Where the winners are the ones who adapt the fastest.
Who see the opportunities.
And take the risks.
It's a fascinating world.
And Graham's essay does a great job of explaining it.
Cutting through all the noise to get to the core principles. It's not just about building a business.
It's about solving problems.
About having a vision.
And making a real impact.
That's something that applies to more than just startups.
Yeah, any field where you're trying to innovate.
Where you're being creative.
And where you want to succeed.
It all comes down to growth and adaptability.
You know, it's funny. This whole conversation makes me think about that analogy again.
Oh, the scientists.
Yeah, the startup founder as a scientist.
I like that one.
They're both like explorers in a way, right?
Pushing the boundaries.
Trying to figure out what's possible.
And that's where growth becomes so important. It's not just about, making money.
It's about creating something truly new.
Something that can change the world.
So growth, it's not just the numbers, it's the impact.
The ripple effect a big idea can have.
Think about the internet.
Oh, perfect example.
Started as this niche thing.
And now it's everything.
It changed everything.
And it wasn't just about profits, it was about connecting people.
Sharing information.
Making the world more open.
So it's about having that big vision.
Yeah, and the drive to make it happen.
Even when it's hard.
Even when people tell you you're crazy.
It's about seeing the world as it could be, not just as it is.
That's a good way to put it.
And that's why growth is so powerful. It's what drives that progress.
It makes those crazy visions a reality.
Okay, so what would you say to someone listening to this who's thinking, this is amazing, but it's also terrifying? I don't know if I can do this.
I'd say don't be afraid to dream big.
Yeah, the world needs more people who are willing to challenge things.
Push the boundary.
Let's go for those big goals.
Even if you don't end up building the next Google,
or Facebook.
the things you learn along the way, that's invaluable.
The resilience.
Or resourcefulness.
Figuring out how to solve problems.
Building something from nothing.
Those are skills that matter everywhere.
Not just in startups.
So if you're out there and you have that itch to create something.
That entrepreneurial spirit.
Don't let anyone tell you that growth is a bad thing.
Embrace it. Chase it.
Use it as your compass.
It'll push you beyond your comfort zone.
Because in the startup world, growth, it's not just about the numbers.
It's about making a difference.
It's about leaving the world better than you found it.
That's a great way to sum it up.
So I think that's a good place to wrap up our deep dive into Paul Graham's startup growth.
It's a fantastic essay.
Really insightful.
I highly recommend it.
To anyone interested in, entrepreneurship,
Innovation.
the power of ideas.
It's a must read.
And until next time, keep diving deep and keep chasing those dreams.